All right, let's get on to our next speaker. It's not every day in your career where you have kind of a life-changing moment. So I don't think Dr. Debbie Rose knows this about me, but in 2004, I just had to attend an event that she was speaking at. It was National Council on Aging, American Society on Aging. It was in San Francisco. Here's this 29-year-old graduate student, really passionate about balance and falls and how can we do something about it. In fact, just a couple years before, she had come out with her book, Fall Proof, which was the book that I was telling Cody, somebody needs to write a book on balance, right? Like trainers don't know how to train older adults for balance. Somebody needs to write this book. Here comes this book. She now becomes my hero in the industry. And so in 2004, I went to a one-day, all-day focused on balance, and it changed my life. I mean, ever since, I have been focused on how can I help older clients have better balance, better agility, better mobility, better gait. She teaches you all of that. If you don't own the book Fall Proof, she probably won't tell you you should buy it. I'm telling you right now, you should own it. You should buy it. Next year, Scott Rawcliffe's going to have a program, how to fall-proof your Facebook. I can already hear it. It's an absolute tremendous resource. I've used it to train my trainers. Cody and I went through her fall-proof certification. If you're a trainer geek like Scott, who just wants to learn techniques, strategies, do the fall-proof certification. Absolute tremendous program. So it's a real honor for me to be able to introduce someone who really shaped my career. In fact, I spent 5 years studying fall proof. Okay, you don't have to take that long to read the book. I did my entire dissertation on the fall proof program. 16-week study using the fall proof program with adults over the age of 65. So it really is what led to my passion for balance training, mobility training, and all of that. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Debbie Rose.
Well, good morning, everybody. How many of you already integrate balance and mobility training into your programs that you do with older adults? Okay, well, I guess I can leave now because you're ready to go. So I'm going to talk about something that is incredibly passionate to me, and I do work with older adults at the Center for Successful Aging at Cal State Fullerton, and I work with individuals of all functional levels. And the one thing that we pride ourselves on is creating a continuum of programming and meeting the older adult where the older adult is at the time they walk into our center, and then moving them forward up the mobility spiral. So, did you know that falling is a bimodal distribution? That those most likely to die from a fall are very young children, below the age of 10, and older adults, 65 plus. Now, there's two reasons why I put this up in front of you. I don't know of any child under the age of 10 years that goes into his or her pediatrician, and the pediatrician says, well, you have to expect that you're going to fall because you're less than 10 years of age. You should just avoid doing things that lead you to falling. But the same 65-plus person that goes into their primary care physician hears the reverse story. Oh, you're falling. Well, you have to expect that. You're getting older. My suggestion to you is just don't do anything that might lead you to fall. The second reason why I put this up is because there are so many federal policies and initiatives in place to prevent children falling. Helmets, playground safety, a lot of different federal initiatives. For older adults, why bother? They're getting older. They're going to fall. It's a given. So I want you to be thinking about this as I talk through this. But we do know that falls are a major public health issue. They're the leading cause of both fatal and non-fatal injuries among older adults. And while Dr. Abramson talked about the burgeoning number of older adults who are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, one older adult over the age of 65 will fall every 20 seconds, and many of those will die as a result of that. Now, this is not intended to scare you, but it's intended to tell you that it needs to be an important focus of any program that you design for older adults, and for some older adults more than others. 1 in 3 older adults will fall at least once a year, but here's the thing. Very few of them will discuss the event with their primary healthcare provider. The good news is they may talk about it with you if you gain their trust. You may be the first person to really become aware that the older adult that you're working with is at risk for falls. They not only have physical consequences, but they have oftentimes lasting psychological consequences. And if they don't sustain a fracture from the fall, they oftentimes damage themselves psychologically. We talk a lot about the fear of falling syndrome in the literature. That's very real, and it can oftentimes lead to an older adult restricting their physical activities. So the unfortunate thing about that is they're not going to come into your centers, or they're not going to come into your gyms. They're going to be the people that you have a mandate to try to reach, because they're the people that really need you as well. And of course, it costs a lot of money to fall. $30 billion spent on acute care costs alone in the United States in 2012. So it's a very expensive thing to happen. What we need to understand about falls, just as we need to understand that the older adult population that we're working with is highly heterogeneous, the reasons for falling are just as heterogeneous. That it's rarely older adults falling for the same reasons. Falls are multifactorial. If you wanted to find out if your client was at risk for falls, the first place to start is to ask them, have you had a fall in the past year? Oh, you have? More than one? Because we know that fall history is the best predictor of future falls. So getting that little piece of information is a very first good beginning for you. We also know that individuals who have poor strength, particularly lower body strength, are almost 4 times more likely to fall than individuals of the same age who have good levels of lower body strength. The same is true for endurance. We also know that impaired gait and balance is in the top 10 for risk factors. So if you're evaluating your client's balance and gait, you're already getting a very good window into their level of fall risk. We also know from the work of Mary Tinetti, who's a pioneer in aging falls research, is that if the client that you're working with is on 4 or more medications, irrespective of the type of medication, they're also very high risk for falls. But we also know that the benzodiazepine category is one of the more significant categories we need to be aware about. So what are those? They're the things that elevate mood, so the antidepressants, lower anxiety, because in some cases aging can be stressful. I don't know why, but some people think it is. And so they may be on anti-anxiety and anxiolytics. So again, a benzodiazepine category. And then also to sleep better. So sedative hypnotics are going to be key medications that you want to have an eye on to find out if this individual is elevating the risk factors for falls. Impaired vision and cognition. Impaired cognition is the #1 reason for hospitalization. We also know that individuals with dementia of the Alzheimer's type are 200% more likely to fall than individuals without cognitive impairment. So again, if you're working with individuals who have cognitive impairment, there's something for you to think about, that they're likely to be more at risk than individuals who have higher levels of cognition. Vision is a big one. I always talk to my clients about, what are you doing with those bifocals, trifocals, graded lenses? They're a risk factor for falls. Because they are, because every single time we're moving our vision between any change in a lens, we're momentarily unable to see clearly. And when do we tilt our head down? Usually when we're crossing obstacles. So probably the prime time when you don't want to have a change in graded lenses going on. Age is a factor. Darn it, that's the only thing we can't do anything about. We do know that individuals over the age of 75 are going to experience higher risk for falls than individuals below the age of 75. And I'm going to use the term chronologically, and I'm going to use the term on average, but we all know that many individuals over the age of 75 are not chronologically close to that age. That biologically, physiologically, they're functioning in the low 50s, 60s. So don't automatically assume because they turned 75 last week, oh my gosh, the fall risk is going up exponentially. So again, be thinking about that. And then environmental factors. Community-dwelling adults are generally falling because they're slipping and tripping. And so that could be as a function of the environment itself, but it could also be that they're experiencing subtle changes, particularly in the lower body, particularly around the ankle and foot, where they're not actually picking up the foot high enough to avoid that raised pavement. 1 centimeter of clearance is all we need in a stride. So imagine if we have that weak dorsiflexor plantar flexor strength, we're going to be finding ourselves slipping and tripping. So lots of reasons why people fall. So I had an epiphany a while ago, and I got tired of hearing the doom and gloom that centered around doing fall risk reduction programs or fall prevention programs. And so I've reframed the whole way I look at it. I'm now apologetic that I called my book Fall Proof, because no older adult wants the FALL word, that four-letter word, in any program that they see. But I'm stuck with it for right now, until I can distance myself from it. So I'm more interested in how does falling have an effect on a person's whole person wellness, because I'm all about wellness. I love to make my older adults fit, but I want all of my older adults to be well, to really feel well, across all of the dimensions of wellness. So how does it affect whole person wellness? Well, clearly a person who's experiencing falls or has a fear of falling is going to become physically deconditioned because they're not going to be out and about as much. They're not going to be as physically active. And it's not going to be just a case of they're not coming in to work out with you 2 or 3 times a week. They're not leaving their house. They're not leaving their couch. And in the short term, that's a really clever strategy, because if you don't get up, you don't fall. But here's the problem. The minute you do get up, your risk falls exponentially. It leads to reduced self-efficacy. You stop believing that you can do things. So it really lowers that level of self-confidence. Oh, I don't really think I should accept this invitation from my friend because I don't really feel comfortable going to a restaurant that I've never been to before. And, I'll have to take my walker. I have to worry about whether there's good lighting. I have to worry about whether it's not an ergonomically structured restaurant like the one here in the hotel. And all of these things lead to further isolation, which in turn leads to increased depression. And we also know that depression is a risk factor for falls. Is it a risk factor because the individual is on antidepressants, or is it a risk factor because the individual has socially isolated themselves because they have a fear of falling? And it's stressful. It's stressful to be worried about falling. It's really stressful. I have clients that come into the center and they are in tears saying to me, I just can't afford to fall one more time. Imagine the pressure that puts on you. Oh my goodness. I best put them in cotton wool and just try to keep them as safe as I can, rather than challenging them and really getting them to move forward. It also leads to reduced participation in social activities. We've already talked about that. And this loss of belief in self or others. They don't even believe that you can help them anymore. So that in and of itself means that you have to market yourself really well and help them develop that self-efficacy, because we derive it not only from internal sources, but we derive self-efficacy from external sources. We derive self-efficacy from mastery. So if I can feel successful in what I'm doing, that is going to elevate my self-efficacy, and that becomes a breeding ground for increased self-efficacy. So those external sources, the social support that an older adult derives from being in group-based programs, which I love the most. The social support that the client derives from you, the personal trainer, who has a genuine interest in that person and a genuine interest in helping that person become more mobile. So it has a deleterious effect. But here's the good news. I see the role of fall risk reduction as being a pathway to whole person wellness. It's just a different entry point. The person's coming to you because they're fearful of falling. They're not coming to you because they want to run a marathon in the next 6 weeks. They're not coming to you as a healthy older adult. They're coming to you because they want you to help them be more physically mobile. So I think you have an opportunity to do all the things, especially the things that we can ameliorate or we can actually improve significantly, and that's things like strength and endurance, impaired balance and gait. That's what we do the best. We're exercise specialists. We're very good at doing that. But here are the other things that you can do. You can elevate their self-efficacy. With a carefully designed program that is progressively challenging and enjoyable, you can elevate their self-efficacy because you create an environment for them where they develop mastery. And it may not be in large strides, but every small step that they take and feel mastery, the more you're heightening their self-efficacy. The more you socially support, reinforce, motivate, provide good corrective feedback, motivating feedback, you're elevating their self-efficacy. It also provides an opportunity for affirmation or meditation. And we integrate a lot of meditative mindfulness activities into our full risk reduction program because we know it's really critical if we're going to be successful to lower stress. They're already stressed. They're coming in stressed. And here I am putting them in these highly challenging balance environments. Am I making them more stressed? I hope not. But we need to offset that by really focusing on mindfulness. And the thing that we know is as we get older, it is a little bit more challenging to do 2 or 3 or 4 things at once. And so the more that we're in the moment and focused, the better we're able to operate across a variety of different contexts. Mentorship, the best thing that I love about the group-based programs that I operate is my older adult clients become the mentors of new clients coming in. Takes all the pressure off me. And I don't know if you know this, but an older adult will often believe a peer more than they will believe you, the expert. So if you tell them they're doing really well, they'll turn to their neighbor in the class and say, "What do you think?" And if they get that socially supporting reinforcement, they have mastered whatever it is. So I feel sorry for those of you that are younger because you have to work that much harder to demonstrate your abilities and capabilities with older adults. I'm already there. I'm one of those leading edge boomers and had to sit through that absolutely awful video that did not even begin to express who I am. So again, to Dr. Abramson, yes, we're not all the same. And I'm going to be your worst enemy if you don't know what you're doing. So just watch out if I walk into your gym. So, the role for full risk reduction programs, a pathway to whole person wellness. It's a great marketing line. I hate to see pamphlets that are developed that says, and they're showing some poor older adult strewn across the floor, or worse still, downstairs, and the epitaph is, "You are one fall away from." Oh my goodness, fear and scare. No place for it. Absolutely no place for it when we're working with older adults. So, we do experience changes as we age. You're experiencing them right as you sit there because every single person in this room has got a day older. All right, so be thinking about that. Don't say I'm here and you're there. You're on your way to there, wherever that there may be. So we do know that we will experience altered sensory reception and integration, and good for that older adult that was on the roller coaster. The problem with the work that I do is all I kept worrying about was her cervical rotation, her vestibular system, and all she was thinking about how fun that was. So there are some downsides of doing the kind of work that I do. So there is altered sensory reception. We are all going to experience vision changes of a lesser or greater degree as we get older. We are going to experience changes in the plantar surface of the feet. We're not going to sense the surface quite as well as we used to. So yes, barefoot training, excellent, unless the older adult you're working with has significant foot structure problems that actually makes it contraindicated for them to work in bare feet. And in fact, if older adults are at high risk for falls, it's actually contraindicated to have them moving around barefooted because they need the support from a good supportive shoe. But strength and mobility training of the foot and ankle, absolutely. It's got to be a very important part of your program. And we will experience changes in the vestibular system, or that internal ear accelerometer. So we won't be quite as receptive to changes in speed of head turns. And we may, in fact, experience some level of dizziness if we don't have a highly functioning vestibular system. There will be changes in static and dynamic balance. So my ability to stand as still as I can will change a little bit. I might get a little bit more movement. And dynamic balance will be changing. We will all experience difficulty dividing attention between tasks. There is a change in our attentional capacity. But the thing for me is, it's not about being able to divide attention, it's being able to switch attention appropriately. So when you're doing two things at once, do you stop doing the cognitive task or the ancillary task and worry about your posture and your balance? The interesting thing about research is it actually shows the reverse. Individuals who are at high risk for falls oftentimes continue doing the secondary task at the expense of their balance. So they're not switching. They're not switching their attention from the ancillary task back to the primary task of balance. Whereas individuals at low risk, oh, to heck with that cognitive task or that ancillary task. I've got to worry about my balance. So it's helping them make that switch back. And it may be a subconscious switch, but it may also be a very conscious switch. Changes in the walking pattern that result in slower speed. And we know that gait speed is also a risk factor for falls. That once individuals move below 3 feet per second, we want to be concerned about that. That their gait pattern is changing and slowing to a degree. So it's not about telling older adults to move more slowly, because that in and of itself can be the wrong thing to do, because moving more slowly requires more motor control. But moving too quickly requires a high level of motor control, but also a high level of reactive capacity and heightened risk for falls. So I'm a theoretician. I'm going to potentially bore you with a little bit of research here, but I'm of the opinion that theory drives practice. Whatever theoretical framework you believe in will determine how you practice. And so the three that has really shaped my practice over the last 30-odd years are these theories. Now, you don't have to know anything about these theories today, but I do encourage you to learn a little bit more about the theoretical frameworks. Dynamical systems framework. I'm going to give you a graphic that's going to probably put that into a nutshell. Ecological theory of perception and action. If we don't perceive the environment appropriately or the task at hand, we don't act appropriately. So again, it's not just about making the older adult client that you're working with motorically skilled, it's also about helping them perceive much more effectively so that the perception matches the action. And the one that really drives my practice and drives the foolproof program is the constraints-led approach to movement coordination. It's the recipe, in my view, for creating an effective fall risk reduction program. So why do we need a multi-system approach to evaluation and intervention? How many of you do selected evaluations to determine underlying balance and mobility issues with your clients? Oh, good, so I can stay. There's something for a lot of people to learn in the next few slides. So knowing who is at risk for falls is only the first step. What do you do? So somebody's at a low risk, moderate risk, high risk. Does it inform your programming? No, you've got to know a lot more about the client than just whether they're at risk or not risk for falls. Balance is complex. And I'm going to, by the end of this presentation, either have completely overwhelmed you with what I'm going to tell you, because I'm going to try to put into 23 minutes and 29, 28, 27 seconds everything I know about fall risk reduction, and it's not going to happen. And you might see the slides start rolling through much more quickly. So the thing to understand is multiple systems are likely contributing to the balance and mobility disorder. So a person comes in to you, they do the 30-second chair stand, if you're someone into highly validated assessment tools, and they fall below the criterion threshold for functional independence. You say, wow, this person's got lower body strength issues. Resistance training, right? But it's a chair stand. There's more to a chair stand than strength. There's also movement of the center of mass over the base of support. So there's a balance component to standing up. So you've got to look beyond just the strength measurement and look to see why that person may be having the difficulties they're having. the evaluation results that you get from really doing a thorough assessment of an individual's multiple systems is going to really help you tailor your rehab for that individual. Or in the case of more higher functioning older adults who are starting to experience some early balance problems, is going to help you nip them in the bud, because you're going to know exactly where you need to prioritize your efforts. So here in a nutshell is the dynamical systems model applied to balance and mobility. So let's think about the things that contribute to good balance and mobility. FAI developed a beautiful model in 1997 that really altered the course of the way I looked at things and the way I developed tools and the way I administered programs. So clearly, you're going to see a lot of older adults walk into your gym or your center, and they're going to have clear biomechanical constraints. They may have changes in bony structure as a function of a chronic disease, whether it be osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, rheumatoid arthritis, or they may simply have biomechanical constraints brought on by a sedentary lifestyle. Or, for goodness sake, they've been walking around with that walker that was never designed for them, and my goodness, if I'm doing this all the time, eventually I'm going to adopt that habitual pattern of movement. Stability limits and verticality. Do you know when you're truly upright? Do you really know when your spine is in neutral? Do you know how far you can lean away from your base of support safely? Do your older adult clients know that? Anticipatory postural adjustments. This is one of the first strategies to change with older adults. They stop being anticipatory and become reactionary when they're starting to have balance problems. So what do I mean by that? If I were walking along and I wanted to step up onto a curb, if I had good anticipatory postural adjustments, I would already be planning the next phase of my movement pattern before I reach the obstacle. So I'm up, I'm looking at it, I'm taking a quick look, I'm looking with my eyes, not with my head, so I'm not dropping that head down, just looking to see the obstacle, and I'm smoothly stepping up and over the obstacle. That would be a good demonstration of anticipatory postural control. The individual who's losing that capacity is going to begin shortening their stride as they approach the obstacle, sizing it up, and then planning the next phase of their movement pattern. I already know from that qualitative evaluation of their movement that they're starting to experience anticipatory postural adjustment issues. It's the same as the individual that you ask to stand on one leg, and you're shocked when that person can't stand on one leg. They're doing the best they can to lift that leg up for you, but there's something missing. And what's missing is the anticipatory postural adjustment before they lift the leg. So they're not shifting the belly button over the stance leg before they lift the foot up. They're leaving it right here because it's the safest place for it to be, between the 2 feet, and they're trying to, by golly, use as much strength as they can to get that foot up. So again, that's a window into understanding that there are anticipatory postural adjustment changes occurring in that individual. And I can go on and on about this, but now I'm down to 90 minutes and 15 seconds. So the types of tools that I gravitate to using are going to be tools that help me evaluate the multiple systems that are likely contributing to balance. And the 3 biggies are the sensory, the motor, and the cognitive system. Just remembering that there's a peripheral and a central sensory system. So there's what you're getting in and how you're processing it. And there's a central and a peripheral motor system, how you're deciding what you're going to do at a central level, and then how you're utilizing the neuromuscular system to effect the action. So I'm a big proponent of impairment-based assessments. If I get to work in my lab, I can do that. But the beautiful thing now is smartphone technology is now allowing us to take our balance assessments out into the field and do it all on a smartphone. It's fabulous. Tools like Sway Balance, amazing tools. First came into the industry for concussions, really interested in being able to do sideline diagnosis of concussion in athletes. They reached out to me and said, you know, we really think we have a tool that would be appropriate for the older adult market, particularly individuals who are at risk for falls. Fabulous. Can you imagine being able to get quantitative assessments using a smartphone technology? Fabulous. That's where we're going with this. And you can use this tool to get impairment-based evaluation of multiple systems. Still in its infancy, but we're working on it. If I don't have access to technology, I'm going to choose my balance assessments very carefully. And if you look at this particular balance assessment, it's actually the performance-oriented mobility assessment developed by Mary Tinetti, one I would use for individuals at high risk for falls, because here's the other thing I'm going to share with you today. There is no one single balance test that will be able to accomplish all that you want to accomplish, because older adults at different levels of fall risk need a different evaluation to challenge the various systems. But look at this. If I look back at that dynamical systems model, I would choose this tool because it's really tapping into each of the elements of that dynamic systems model that I need to be evaluating. And I can get that by looking at individual items on that POMA scale. Fabulous. This is a scale. I don't think Mary Tinetti knew she was doing it, but what happened was it beautifully models the dynamic systems model. This tool was designed because of the dynamic systems model, and this is the Fullerton Advanced Balance Scale. Why did I develop it? Because I was frustrated with balance assessment tools out there that were too easy. And so when you're working with higher functioning older adults, you want to be choosing tools that will be sufficiently challenging to them to really get at the window of impairment that you're seeing. So again, carefully chosen test items to model each of the subsystems that I'm really interested in evaluating. So yes, I get a total score. It gives me an indication of their fall risk, but I'm more interested in the individual items in that particular test that are going to give me windows into the origin of the impairments that the older adult is experiencing. And so here it is. This is what drives fall proof. It drives what I do. Again, the dynamic systems model brought to me, oh my goodness, here are the core components of any fall risk reduction program that I need to incorporate. Biomechanical constraints, obviously I've got to work on strength and flexibility, and also postural alignment. Stability limits verticality, I want to look at center of gravity control training. I call it affectionately the belly button exercises. So learning to move from the core as opposed to the nose or the head in a backwards moving position. Sensory orientation, I want to do multi-sensory training. Once I've established which of the sensory systems is most impaired, whether it's vision, vestibular, somatosensory, or a combination of 2 or 3 of those, now I'm going to really carefully construct the environment to really work on the systems that are impaired. Anticipatory postural adjustments, again, I'm going to be working on my center of gravity control training, but in a very dynamic environment. Altering task demands, altering surfaces. Postural responses. Here's the thing. If an older adult in your program never loses balance because you're so careful to make sure that they never lose their balance, you're not teaching them how to regain balance. A lot of research has developed perturbation treadmills. So they bring an older adult in and they perturb them nonstop for 10 to 12 days. And it's remarkable. The older adult gets significantly better at being able to respond to a loss of balance. It isn't just about reaction. It isn't just about muscle power. It's a skill. It's a motor coordination skill. So we want to teach that skill. So by golly, if my older adults don't lose balance while they're in my session, I haven't done a good job. Because I want them to lose balance safely, but I also want them to be able to learn how to regain balance. And if you don't practice something, you don't learn something, right? And then the last one is stability and gait. What do we tend to think of when we think of an older adult gait pattern where the individual is at high risk for falls? Throw out some descriptors for me. Shuffling gait. Very short stride, absolutely. Wide base, slow. What was that? Yes, potentially, if they've got biomechanical constraints, or they're concerned about falling backwards, by golly, they're going to bias their posture forward to prevent that happening. So if they're going to go forward and see where they're going, as opposed to going backward and not being able to do that. So you've got it. So what do we do to fix that? We mess with their gait pattern. Again, another dynamic systems principle. We change it up. We get them to walk faster, slower, stop, start, on their balls of their feet, on their heels, narrow walking, wide walking. You can't change an habitual movement pattern unless you throw it out of its habit. So dynamic systems talks about being in movement wells. The deeper that well, the more habitual the behavior, the more you have to do to move them out of that well. So you have to be much more aggressive in a gentle way. Do those two words go together? Yeah, sure they do. All right. So here's my mantra. If you take the constraints-led approach to movement coordination, you have your recipe for developing a balance and mobility component to your healthy aging program or your whole full risk reduction programming. Because I can tell you right now, there is so much work to be done in full risk reduction. That if that's your passion and that's the segment of the market that you want to really capitalize on, you're going to have a lot of business for a lot of years to come. And it's not going to be with older adults because we're starting to see the early signs of balance impairment occurring in the early 40s. So and God help us with Gen Y, because they're like this the whole day. Their pants are down by their knees. So, I mean, you're going to have a lot of work to do for a long time. This is where they're at. So if you want to get a structural kyphosis by the time you're 30, keep up that cell phoning while you're walking. It's got to be up here, walking. And then you actually might be able to see who's coming in front of you at the same time too. So, and because I'm in that, the leading age boomers, I'm already having difficulties. I have to stop to text anyway, so I'm good to go. So here it is, constraints-led approach. It's all built around the individual, the task, and the environment. So here's your recipe. You have to know as much as you can about the individual. You need to know what their strength level is, so you need to test for that. You need to know if they have sensory loss, and you can get that by inquiring about their medical history, or you can actually do tests to evaluate that. You want to know about their medical conditions. You want to know if an individual has diabetes that isn't well controlled because they've more than likely got secondary peripheral neuropathy of the feet, or they've got retinal neuropathy. So again, you've got vision and the somatosensory system being adversely impacted by a primary condition. And you want to know what their level of cognition is. And we do a very simple test that is it's not problematic like the MMSE, which is the mini mental status exam, called a mini-cog. 2 quick questions. It helps us know immediately whether we need to be really thinking about incorporating some activities, acknowledging that there is cognitive change going on. So there's your recipe. You can leave now because it's all done. So I'm going to give you 3 other principles by which to operate. Why do we manipulate the task demands? Why do we make the task more challenging? Why do we change the sequencing? Why do we have them work in altered bases of support, whether it be tandem, whether it be feet together, whether it be staggered stance? Because we know the motor system is extremely responsive to task demands. So if I really want to work on my motor system's contribution to balance, I'm going to really manipulate the task. So you can see we have a gentleman over here on a ball doing trunk leans. We've got an adult here that's working on coordination pattern. We call this dancing with the spots. We've got a client working on a reduced base of support doing reaching activity. So we're actually moving from center of gravity control training to postural response training, because more than likely if I hold this ball out too far, that person's either going to have to use a hip strategy to try to maintain balance, or they're going to use a step strategy. So I'm already segueing this client into that. And we see a photograph here. This is my cover girl on my second edition of the book, doing dynamic activity training where she's moving across surfaces of different orientations and picking up at the same time. So very functional activities, but very challenging for many older adults. Principle number 2, manipulating the environment. We know that the sensory systems are responsive to the manipulation of environmental constraints. So you need to be doing work with your older adult clients, irrespective of their functional abilities, to tune up their sensory systems. So engage vision, remove vision, alter the support surface underneath the client that you're working with, but know why you're doing it. Yes, we can all stand an older adult client on a Bosu ball and have them doing squats. What are we doing? Are we strengthening core? Well, they're also getting an incredible amount of balance value too, especially if you get them to target a vertical with their eyes, because you're actually working on an altered surface, eyes are open, you're really improving their use of vision. So again, why not just stand them on a Bosu ball thinking you're working on core? You could be working on core, you could be working on proprioceptive function, you can be working on vision. So again, think about all of the things that you can accomplish in one simple activity. So here you can see that we've done all sorts of things to manipulate the surface underneath the feet, and in some cases we've removed vision for those who are brave enough to have it removed, but in other cases we've simply engaged vision. So in this case, if they're standing on an altered surface, their vision is engaged, guess which sensory system they're prioritizing for upright balance? Prior to those of you that said the vestibular system, because that's in essence what you're doing. So you're carefully constructing the environment to work on the system you're most interested in working on. And then we need to think about this: optimization or compensation. Why is it that an older adult that you ask to stand in front of you for 10 seconds just can't keep their eyes closed for that full 10 seconds? Their eyes pop open about 3 or 4 and they say, I just felt like I was losing my balance. And what you may have observed was there was a little bit of sway, but there wasn't that much. But there was enough for them to feel unstable. So now they've got very reduced limits of stability. They've probably got poor verticality because they're not really aware of the fact that they're still quite well over their base of support. And so they overwhelmingly open their eyes. So we say that person is visually dependent. They're dependent on vision to maintain balance. Well, why? Do they have peripheral neuropathy under the feet so that they have a perception that they're swaying more because they're not getting the same quality of information from the plantar surface of the foot? Or is there nothing wrong at all with the plantar surface of their foot other than simple age-associated changes? And so now what do we need to do to really improve their comfort level at moving while they're standing? So again, we don't really know why the individual is doing what they're doing until we really investigate the issue. So we want to optimize function by stimulating or forcing the use of sensory systems that are intact or when an impairment is temporary. And some are. The older adult who's developing cataracts, they have a temporary impairment of vision. It's going to significantly influence how they operate in your environment. The good news is there's cataract surgery. And we know from the research done in my home, Australia, way to go, Scott, that cataract surgery, if it's done early, can significantly reduce fall risk. But how many times does a client say to you, well, my primary care physician says, wait a little bit longer. Wait till it gets a little bit bigger. No, because the whole time that that cataract is growing, balance is being adversely affected. Same with hip replacements. Oh, well, my physician wants me to wait till it gets just a little bit worse. Well, how much have we changed the way we do things before that surgery? So again, we want to be really addressing these issues early on. Gosh, I'm down to 4 minutes and 11 seconds. All right, so the other thing is, if you know that the client that you're working with has a permanent impairment in a sensory system. I work with clients who have macular degeneration. They will continue to use vision even though it's barely available to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compensate for that loss by tuning up the 2 other sensory systems that continue to be intact. So they're getting information from other sensory systems and not being so dependent on one that is permanently, at least for right now, permanently affected. So what are the principles of rehab? Well, if I'm developing a fall risk reduction program, the first thing I want to know is what's the level of fall risk? I'm going to do very different things with an individual who's at low level of fall risk versus one that's at moderate or at high level of fall risk. I'm going to prescribe the best course of action based on that knowledge. In some cases, I refer my clients out from the center because they need probably a full neurological workup. They more than likely need vestibular intervention, particularly if they have the most commonly diagnosed impairment, which is BPV, which is benign positional vertigo, and it creates dizziness, and it's got nothing to do with the heart medications they're on. It's to do with the fact that they have a mechanical disturbance in the vestibular system that can be quickly repaired. And I'm going to prioritize my treatment plan based on that level of risk. And then my follow-up assessments to find out which systems are contributing to the fall risk. And then I'm going to monitor and modify as needed. I'm always changing things up. I don't ever go in there with more than a good plan, because I know that if I'm working in a group environment with 10 or 12 older adults, all at a similar level of risk, they're all going to need something different. Because if they don't have problems with their sensory systems, why would I lower the level of challenge for them? If their problems are primarily coming from motor system deficits, that's where I'm going to be wanting to prioritize my work with them. Whereas the individuals who are experiencing the sensory deficits, I really want to work with them to improve their sense. So multisensory training is going to be a big part of my program for my clients with sensory deficits, and task demand changing and motor system work is going to be a high contributor when I'm working with individuals who are primarily experiencing full risk because of motor system deficits. Best practice recommendations based on a summary of all the randomized clinical control trials that were done in the United States and some outside of the United States over the past 15 years. In order for any full risk reduction program to be effective, it has to be of moderate to high challenge. So if you're pampering your older adults, stop it right now. It has to be of moderate to high challenge, but it has to be pushing the envelope, not tearing it open. So you really need to know your stuff to make sure when you know your client is at the precipice of risk. And then you need to be able to pull them back so that they experience mastery and then push them forward a little bit more. So it's a little bit of a push and pull. So you've really got to know your stuff. It must be of a sufficient dose. I don't know what that is other than for perpetuity. But what we know from the literature is that a full risk reduction program needs to be at least 50 hours in order to have any significant impact on fall rates. This is all coming out of the randomized clinical control trials. But do not think at the end of 50 hours you are done, because ongoing exercise is needed. But it may be the next step into the next program. So they're coming out of your full risk reduction program and going into one of your other programs that's really going to move them back up that mobility path. You need to target your delivery strategy to the level of risk. And if I can get through these slides in 9 seconds, I'll be able to tell you that. We also know that full risk reduction programs are equally effective in groups or alone. Include a walking program, but don't sacrifice the balance training for it, because you want them to be in a highly supervised environment, and oftentimes with walking programs, they're not. Make sure you include a strength training component, but don't think you're going to fix balance by strength alone, because the randomized clinical control trials say it's not enough. So you really need to be thinking about your balance training component. And exercise alone may not be sufficient if they're at high risk for falls. Are these slides going to be available? Perfect. So you can find out what works with low fall risk. You can find out what works with moderate fall risk. You can find out what works with high fall risk. And that's referral, 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 because you're not going to be doing that. The AGS guidelines are the American Geriatric Society guidelines for evaluating fall risk. These are targeted at primary care physicians, but guess what? A lot of primary care physicians that you would like to refer your clients to have no idea that these exist. They have no idea that there's an annual wellness visit that is available for older adults who are Medicare eligible. That's our stuff. We want them to go into a primary care physician for an annual wellness visit, because that's all about prevention. And here's the good news. The majority of falls are preventable. And I need more of you out here doing the work that you're doing to reduce that fall risk in the older adult clients that you're working with. A number of fall risk factors have been identified. We know the top 10 list. And we know that 2/3 of that top 10 list we can ameliorate or we can significantly improve by exactly the kinds of things we do. We also know effective prevention and intervention strategies are available. And here's the really good news. Specialist training programs are available. We have one at the Center for Successful Aging. You need to be well trained. Conducting balance and mobility training takes another specialty on top of what you already have. And if you want that to be your niche market, then you need to get really good training. And if anything I said to you today is, wow, I never knew that. Wow, that's interesting. then educate yourselves. Balance and mobility is an integral part of a well-rounded program for older adults. And I really hope you'll get really jazzed and excited to incorporate it because it is a pathway to whole person wellness. It is not a downward spiral. We do see amazing things, amazing transformations in our clients, and our goal is to move them up that pathway to whole person wellness. And they come in at different entry points. They may come in at the healthy entry point, but many will come in and need your help who are not at that point. But my goals are the same, to move them back up to that path to whole person wellness. So thanks for your time today.